Hi everyone. I went to dry my hair and I came back thinking I had 5 minutes and there it was, noon. So here I am. Very, very excited to sit down with Tracee. I see she's on. Hi Tracee. I'm going to see if I can invite you here. It's always fun playing with technology. Hopefully, there we
Hello
go.
there. How are you?
Hi. I am so
I'm
well.
doing really
How are
well. It's great
you?
to see you. Thank you for inviting me. I'm glad we're going to have this conversation.
I'm so well, I just feel so grateful for your time. I have been following your work for a long time and enjoyed I listened to your book on audio, which is really lovely, and there's some very liminal kind of moments in the audiobook that's really interesting
Oh,
with the sound.
I would love to hear more about what your experience was because it was a very liminal experience recording the book because it was during the height of the pandemic and the recording studio was closed. So I actually got someone to
Oh,
let me into their studio and I was by myself uh, recording it.
wow.
So it was very liminal, that's for sure.
Yeah, I think, for those who have read it, but, it might be a different experience to hear your words. Um, and then these parts where the sound gets kind of spacey and um, it really took me into, what might be the beginning of a Yoga Nidra experience.
I
So
love hearing
that
that.
was really cool.
Um, we're here today, though, for this beautiful book.
Uh,
Thank you
thank
for
you.
birthing this into the world. I think it's such a beautiful resource for teachers of yoga and also I would just say space holders in general.
Thank you. Yeah, I've been thinking about that more. It's like I wrote that book and I'm like, all these talks I've been giving, I've been saying, this actually, you don't need to know yoga or do yoga. And you don't have to necessarily even identify as like, I'm a trauma survivor. As we know, we're all holding trauma in some capacity. And anyone who's holding space in sports, in schools, in business atmospheres, corporate atmospheres, we know that there is someone in that space that is actively processing trauma, and having some sensitivity to that is going to go a long way in those shared
Yes,
spaces. So I'm glad you saw
absolutely.
that.
It's been a long time since I've taught yoga asana. Um, and I felt that it applicable in so many different instances in so many different spaces. I have a lot of questions that I would love to ask you about the book. Are you okay with that? Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I love that. Thank you,
Um,
Tracee.
what I love is where you talk about the inner guidance of kind of allowing people and giving space for people to recognize that they have permission sometimes, right? We have to let people know that this is also a thing. It's not something, I know, at least for me, when I first started to practice yoga, it was not really any kind of direction towards inner guidance. It was really more about everything
Mm.
was externally kind of guided, and you were almost expected to mimic and copy what it was that the person in the front of the class was doing. And so, I think that yoga has changed a lot in the last, couple of decades, and we're moving closer towards the place where we're looking to really explore our inner wisdom. But what I love about how you talk about the inner guidance is not only as a teacher creating space for inner guidance in the class, but for the individual within the class. So can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. Well, I think one of the things that can happen when we've been through trauma, or just broaden it and say, in the daily social structures that we're in right now, with the speed of life and the expectations of life, there's a tendency to disconnect, to power through. And that causes us to, and there's reasons that we do that. I think our body, and I say it in the book, is brilliant in what it does to protect us and keep us going. And these are survival mechanisms. But what happens there is a pattern of disconnection. So we start to lose the sense of what we like, what feels right for us. Right? We don't even know that anymore. Many of us, we're not in tune with what our body is telling us in any given moment. So I believe a lot of the yoga practice, the embodied parts of that practice, so the asana practice, is about reawakening that connection. And I'm not sure if this is 100% what you were referring to, so let me know if I'm off track. But what I'm exploring are just subtle choices. A lot of times what I'll do with the group is, do you like your palms up or your palms down? Right? That difference. And also how those subtle shifts can shift other parts of our body, right? My shoulders have to change. And just getting back in tune with small changes and how those affect how we feel, in this
Beautiful.
body.
So what I hear you saying is also kind of cultivating this embodied wisdom, that we get to listen deeply and then feel and kind of make notes, whether they're mental notes or they're written notes or something else, that we get to make notes as to what these practices actually do for us and to us. So we've used the word trauma a couple of times, and I would love for you to define trauma as you do in the book. It's like, a lot of times we think about a traumatic experience being a one-time thing. So can you talk about trauma and how it shows up for us?
Yeah. So it's a big topic. I'll try the key points. The first thing I think it's important to say is that there are many different events that could lead to trauma. And as you've pointed to, often the first thing that we think of are those one-time events, like maybe an accident or an attack. But there are many reoccurring events that could lead to a system being overwhelmed over its capacity and going into a trauma response. And the same incident experienced by two different beings can be experienced differently. And that has a lot to do with many environmental factors, whether, we come through the same incident with trauma or without, things like if I was able to get away, if I'm able to express myself even in that moment, and access to resources. Is there someone around who I can tell who will believe me? All those things impact the nervous system and could impact months and even years of how that experience or those experiences are digested in our nervous system. Either they're able to pass through and there's a kind of lower level impact, or there's an ongoing trauma response. And yeah, there are many, many things, like I said, that can take the body into overwhelm. Not being able to live authentically is one of them. We can have trauma that's carried down generationally. And we're often living in a trauma response that we don't even realize, which is a kind of system that our families have taught us, from how they reacted to trauma in their history, and now it's just kind of the way things are. So we can be really swimming in this without seeing it.
I also love that you named climate change as trauma also, because I think that that's something that we're all experiencing, whether we want to acknowledge it or not. And at the same time, we don't think about it as being traumatic necessarily, unless you actually have an event where you're in a tornado or a fire or a serious storm. So how do you think that these traumatic events that are affecting us collectively, like climate change, like the pandemic, um, how does that sit in our systems on a daily basis? Because it's not going away.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you for that, Tracee. And I've been noticing, as I learn about you, how important the natural world is to you. And so I think that's a place we really relate. Um, I think that we are deeply, deeply affected by climate change and by
Mm-hmm.
species extinction. We grew up as humans with other
Mm-hmm.
species in relationship. So those are losses. And as you pointed to, even if we're not aware, our systems are aware. They're feeling that loss. Even, coming inside, being in these inside lives that are primarily indoors, our
Mm-hmm.
systems are feeling a loss. We're used to being in relationship with the natural living world. So we're definitely feeling that loss. And it's this kind of buzz, right? That's like under everything. We know that's there. And a lot of times, what can happen, it feels overwhelming, like something like climate change, pandemic. Um, you know, I'll point to this, they often say that, if there's an accident and someone,
Mm-hmm.
and you're the only one there, it's actually better for the person that's in the accident because you're going to call 911 and take care of everything. When there's a group, sometimes no one knows what to do, or
Mm-hmm.
everyone thinks the other person will do it. And I think the way we're in that, right? It's like it's too big, or someone else will handle it, or we can't point to like who's doing what. And so there's this element of
Mm-hmm.
trauma response of like the freeze that is happening in all this. And so I think I've seen a lot of people when I bring up climate change, like just really go into a too big for me. And I think we want to avoid that, that overwhelm. And I'm trying to talk about climate change and those bigger topics in a way where we can bring more, it's not joyful, but we can come from love and come from joy of
Mm-hmm.
like reconnect to nature, and finding ways to do small things that don't put us into that trauma response, because that's really leading, I think, to some inaction.
Right.
We need to be in
And so
action.
someone in the comments
Yeah.
also mentioned gun violence, which, is one of the things that seems like it's now every day, right? It's like we brace ourselves for this every day. And so what are some of the tools that you think that we can use for ourselves when we find ourselves in that space of overwhelm and deep grief?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, being able
Mm-hmm.
to notice that that's happening, like I'm feeling in my body when you say gun violence, like I'm feeling the tears well up. Um, for me, that's a very present topic. I have a young child, so I think a lot about every day when I send her to school. I have a partner who's from Europe, and I question whether um, I should be here when I have an option to be somewhere else where this isn't such a present issue. So that
Mm-hmm.
conflict is very alive in me. I think one of the things we can learn through the practices of yoga is to be able to go into those somatic feelings, to get more used to holding them, and
Mm-hmm.
being less fearful of them, allowing ourselves to experience that, being able to name it, that vulnerability of being able to name it. I talk a lot about the book about community. Um, we live in generally in a culture that doesn't make space for a lot of feelings, a lot of for grief, so we
Mm-hmm.
can seem very strange to others when we want to show emotion. And I think cultivating more communities, that can be in
Yeah.
your own small social where it's
Mm-hmm.
allowed, right? Otherwise, it gets stuffed inward, and this is where it can rupture. We can really rupture inside or turn off. So we have to be able to feel the feelings and to name them, and that's okay. And then there's also exercises in touching the sensation and moving away from it, that can allow for that nervous system regulation. I love to talk about things and practice things like titration, allowing the feelings to come out slowly so they don't explode, and pendulation, where we go back to a feeling in the body that feels
Mm-hmm.
rooted, supported, and safe, but in
Right.
the effort to come back to the feeling. So this isn't just tune off indefinitely. It is to create more capacity. So when I'm
Mm-hmm.
tuning out, I know I'm tuning out. When I'm going to comfort, I know I'm going to comfort, and I'm doing it in service of being able to
Beautiful.
hold more.
So I love that you talk about community in the book, because I think community is what's going to save us. Um, and I would love to just hear some of the points that you bring in the book about how to create a safer space in community, because I think that we haven't really, as yoga teachers, if you've been teaching for a long time, we haven't really been given those tools, right? And so there's a lot of us who are teaching and have been teaching for a long time and maybe haven't had the space to drop into this book or other books and practices and teachings and trainings on trauma. Um, and I think that the way that we need to be in community has also shifted. So can you talk a little bit more about creating a safer space and what that means to be welcoming to everyone who shows up and welcoming all of them?
There's so much that we can do, and I think even choosing one or two things to start can help make spaces just a little bit more safe. We can never promise a
Mm-hmm.
completely safe
Mm-hmm.
space because we don't know. And that humbleness, I think, is the first place. Like, one of the things I talk about a lot in the book is I think one of the areas we really could work on as yoga teachers is to move away from overpromising and from this feeling that we need to say we know it all
Mm-hmm.
and fix it all. It's more of a space of asking questions, being in
Mm-hmm.
curiosity, taking feedback, and recognizing that the people we're sharing space with, the individual, they know
Right.
themselves the best. Um, so they're going to lead the practice and the journey. And you're, as a yoga teacher, you're inviting them, into their experience, helping them maybe to ask questions that they hadn't thought of, helping them to reawaken where there might be disconnect as they're ready to. But it's always in a shared process with a lot of communication. So that's like one of the things, and when you have the time and space, I think a lot of Michelle's teachings around
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
group agreements are something I've been working with that have been really helpful. So just creating a space that's safer by making sure
Yeah.
we're coming in with some agreements together about how we're going to talk and move in that space. I
Would you
I
share some
use
of the
that a
agreements
lot.
that you use? Because I do think that in certain spaces this is very common, and in other spaces it's something that is really, really new to people. Um,
Yeah.
so if you could speak a little bit more about what community agreements are and maybe some examples.
Yeah, so depending on which spaces, which yoga spaces I'm working in, and some of the teachers I've trained will do this differently. Sometimes we'll come in with some, sometimes we'll collaborate, because I train yoga teachers who work in shelters and a lot of spaces like that that already have some of these practices, but we might want to add to them. Sometimes we create them together. But it's coming into space, setting some ground rules about how we're gonna operate. Things like speaking from the I. That's such a powerful practice and something usually we can all easily agree to, and then we can hold ourselves accountable later. It's common to move into that we in our language we're used to that, but then we're more able to catch it, come back to I, and something like that is so powerful. For ourselves, right? Speaking I really own that. That's my experience, and so importantly, I don't place that experience on someone else and just assume that everyone's experience is like mine. I mean, just that in itself, just knowing that's traumatic, right? There are a lot of things in the book that connect to that. A lot of things teachers will do in yoga class that I found harmful are saying, like, this pose is relaxing, or this pose is going to bring this out. So that's prescriptive. Put your experience on someone else rather than, just encouraging folks to come to how is it for you. So I love to see how like something in the group agreements like that also, can apply to the embodied practice.
Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
There's a couple more points I want to make sure we get to. One of them, because I love to collaborate. I love to collaborate with teachers and friends, because I find that it's more nourishing and spacious for the student and also for me and the other collaborator. And I noticed that you have something where you talk about co-teaching for continuity. Can you talk about this? Because I've been hearing this from a lot of the teachers that I mentor, where, I felt for a while that the paradigm of teaching alone has been kind of over. But at the same time, people are coming to this, it feels like so much doing to do this alone. It feels like so much holding. And I feel like I also need to be held in my teaching. And I felt like you were getting to that in the continuity of the collaboration. So I'd love to hear you speak more about that and how that is trauma informed.
Oh, I love to hear that, that's coming from some other spaces. Yeah. A couple ways. So I love that from the teacher's perspective. I have a nonprofit, and one of the things we do is train yoga teachers in trauma sensitivity, and we don't like to just put them out into the field alone. A lot of the learning happens in the space, and there's much more of a mentorship model where maybe teachers that have been working out in more unconventional spaces where we're sharing yoga might be able to mentor a newer teacher. So there's a little bit of that happens. There's always parts in yoga sequencing that folks feel more comfortable teaching, or enjoy teaching more. If we're honest with ourselves, I like doing closing, I like doing opening. So allowing people to lean into their strengths while they learn from someone else in some of those other areas. So it's helpful for the teacher. And I think I want to say that supporting teachers is very important to me. And there's something that can happen if you're serving with trauma survivors, especially where trauma can get passed on if we're not careful. So really supporting our teachers so that they're taken care of is very, very important. And also when teachers get burnt out and they're not supported, they can actually, harm through resentment, things like that. So I'm very, very careful that my teachers feel supported. And then from the practitioners, standpoint, often when we're working with folks who have been through trauma, there's a lot of abandonment. One of the things we didn't mention with potential causes for trauma, a lot of times we look at things that happened to a person. Sometimes we forget to think about the things that didn't happen. And that's a big point of where we can have trauma, right? If we didn't have that primary caregiver that was supporting our needs early on, not having the kind of social supports that we need to grow and to thrive. So, and that can happen again and again for various reasons. If someone's been put through a system, burnout, which I talked about, people are always leaving. And I wanted to make sure, and I was creating something that there was sustainability and that we weren't re-traumatizing. So you have two teachers there, yoga teachers, they're freelancers, they're doing a lot of things, and we're allowed to leave in life, we're allowed to move, we're allowed to change. But at least if one person moves on or their schedule shifts, you have a consistent person there as you make that transition. So people don't feel like, whoa, I'm starting with someone new and I have to build that trust again.
I want to talk about one last thing. You speak about goallessness in yoga. And I love that because a lot of times, at least in the beginning, when I was learning about yoga, there was always this kind of statement about, well, the goal of yoga is. And so it was very goal oriented. So can you talk to us about goallessness?
Yeah. I'm thinking about a panel I just did with my friend Greg Nardi, and he had a really nice contribution with this, where he was talking about people, inviting folks into different ways of looking at their practice. Like, do I want to work with he was talking about the koshas, and he was saying, like, maybe I'm working on my energetic sphere right now. Maybe I'm working on my physical, my mental. So there's different places that we can work. And maybe not thinking about goals, but thinking about different spheres of energy that we want to work with, or so framing it in a different way. And with goals, we often think very linear, and healing is not like that. Every day is different. So I think when we come in more open, we invite ourselves more into the present moment, to the present experience. And that's where the healing happens. And so it's one of those things where you get farther by wanting to do less.
I'm all about doing less. I'm all about doing less.
Say it again. You are. So, and a lot of what I talk about in the book is from the teacher's perspective of imparting our own ideas of where we think we should be going, or where the student should be going. And that can cause a lot of harm, because you have a different goal for your student than they have for themselves. Sometimes students come in with, they do have a goal, and it might not be realistic to where life is at. And when they feel like they can't meet it, or they're disappointing you, then then they don't show up anymore because they're embarrassed and those kind of things. So the more we can relax, and like you say, and you teach, back off and just be with what is. That's where all the magic happens anyway. You might find this amazing thing happen that wasn't in your sphere of desired goals.
So what I'm feeling into in this is that the relaxation of being goal oriented just creates spaciousness for magic.
Yeah, I love that.
Thank you so much for creating the space to have this conversation about this book. Where can we find the book?
The book's out now. So, my site, laraland.us, has all the links you know, all the typical, you can go through Bookshop, you can go through Amazon, you can, you know, all the major spots. And I know you have a book project coming out soon too. Are you
Yeah.
open to
Yeah,
sharing that as
so
well?
yes, I do. I have a new book that's coming out October 10th. It's called The Luminous Self, Sacred Yoga Practices and Rituals for Remembering Who You Are. Um, and essentially they're practices that are kind of weaved together through some personal storytelling. That are the practices that I've practiced over 20 years that were the most potent and created the most transformation. And so I'm just sharing these practices because I feel like we need them now, and they shouldn't be secret. So that's the book.
Yeah. Well, I'm looking forward to reading that, Tracee. Ritual is so important and it's been so beneficial in my life. And I think these times, as you're saying, kind of with COVID, I guess that's one of the things that's come forward. Oh, I just see a question about the book and audio. You know, not yet. I hope my
Shambhala.
publishers. Holla, Beth, you
We
know I
need
want
the
to do an audio
audio.
version. That's one of my goals. I'm not stating my goal is this, but I'm putting it out there, you know. I hope I can do an audio version, and you know, I hope we can get this book translated into a bunch of languages. So you know, if you like it, write some reviews, that helps. And you want an audio, maybe let
Yeah,
Shambhala know, because I would
reviews are
love to
very
do it.
helpful. That's for sure. So I hope everybody that is teaching or holding space in any way um, dives into this book because there's some really powerful concepts in here. And I really appreciate you taking the time because I know the time that it takes to put something like this together. So thank you so much.
Well, thank you, Tracee. Thank you for being such a big support and, you know, co-signing on this book. It means a lot to me. I know, I respect, you know, who you shine light to. And so the fact that you chose to shine light toward this project, I really deeply appreciate.
Thank you, everybody who's been here listening. I appreciate the time. Bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Take care.
Bye, Tracee.